Professor Lavery, we talked about Ukraine. We mentioned Ukraine several times in the course of discussing Finland's modern history. Let's compare the two. Finland fought a war with Russia, the Soviets, actually more than one, and here's Ukraine fighting this war. What are some of the parallels? And I guess even more important than that, lessons.
I think there are more in the last 10 years or so. There have been a lot of statements in the media and concerning that the a solution of Finlandization of Ukraine, that Ukraine could follow
Finlandization. Okay.
Finlandization.
Okay.
Could follow Finland's example during the Cold War in its relations with the Soviet Union, or with Putin's Russia. There are some significant differences. One is that again, I go back to Russia, how it views Finland, and that Finland is seen as a defensive. Finland is seen in defensive terms, while Ukraine is in Central Europe and is key to any attempt by Russia to expand its power westward.
Offensive.
And offensive, yes. That yes. Russia can can reestablish itself in other parts of Eastern Europe. So, for the reason why Finland was able to pursue the foreign policy it did, and did not become annexed by the Soviet Union, or had a communist puppet government put in. One of the main reasons was that the Soviets were interested in Finland in defensive terms. They didn't want to put a lot of resources into Finland as long as Finland was not a part of some threatening alliance, and the Finns understood this. So, for in terms of the thinking of Putin and Russian nationalists, Ukraine is not seen as a defensive. It's not seen in defensive terms. It's a part of any attempt by Russia to expand or project power. The other difference is that Ukraine has there are a lot of Russian speakers in Ukraine. There's a much more intertwined history and culture and language between the two countries. I believe one of your guests in a previous podcast said that there are a lot of Russians who have never believed that Ukraine is a separate country.
Yeah,
and never understood why there's an independent Ukraine.
We've discussed that in previous episodes. Yeah.
Yes, there is not that attitude. Attitude is widespread in Russia. That there's not this. Finns are not Slavs. Finns are not, with the exception of about 1% of the population. Majority of Finns are not Eastern Orthodox. There is not the kind of historical ties between the two countries. So what the Finland solution for Ukraine supposes that Ukraine will have the same kind of barriers or distance from Russia that Finland had in the Cold War. And
are you referring to cultural barriers and distance, or also physical?
Cultural and
geographical,
geopolitical barriers, and so forth. And Ukraine doesn't have those barriers. It's possible that, however, in terms of applying Finland's experience, there might be some things to apply when and if the conflict ends, in terms of seeking a negotiated solution to it.
Finland did that in 1939, 1940, yes. Right?
Right. The difference, though, was that at the end of the Winter War, that the territory that Russia took from Finland was about 10% of the country's territory.
Oh, wow.
And about 10% of the population, the population of those territories left and resettled in Finland. In Ukraine, it's very hard to imagine that Russia would just be satisfied based on what their demands have been and where their armies have been, of just going back and just being satisfied with Crimea, or a small slice of territory
or something.
Right. So I think that as the war goes on, I think that Ukraine is going to Ukraine will have its own solution to the conflict. The two countries have some real fundamental differences, both in terms of their domestic politics and population, but also their historical ties with Russia.
The more you explain this, the more I'm beginning to realize that the Winter War is really vastly different than this war in Ukraine now. And just everything, Russia's outlook, how the Finnish fought it versus how Ukraine is fighting it, and the territories. Finlandization, I'm not sure is the right solution then for Ukraine, if that's the case.
Yes, in both cases, of both wars, you do see Russian arrogance and incompetence, and in both cases, you see countries that
your example of single column sort of strolling in,
right. In both countries, you have a population that was determined to, fight for their country to the end, with some being outmanned and outgunned, at least on paper. And it wasn't really until the first week or so, couple weeks into the conflict, that Ukraine started to get real infusion of arms. So in both cases, you have countries that defied predictions, not only in Moscow but elsewhere.
Professor Lavery, if you wanted our audience to remember just one point after everything we've talked about Finland, just one point, what would it be?
If I could do two very interrelated points. One is this Russian understanding of Finland in defensive terms. But secondly, as far as the importance of Russia to Finland and in its policy making, I will end with a quote by President J.K. Paasikivi. Paasikivi was Finland's president after World War II and was really the chief architect of this policy of what I like to call constructive appeasement. Paasikivi said, "Russia might not always be a great power in the world, but it will always be a great power to us."
Interesting. Hence, both beneficial and also a threat, right?
Yes.
Interesting.